child. She will dedicate him to the Lord, and he will grow up living with the priest Eli. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel," and he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." And then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And then the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears of it tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end." As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord.
Let's pray. Lord, we ask that you would just help us to have ears to hear, that when you speak, that we would say, "Speak, Lord, to us," because we want to hear, so that we could be the ones who could be part of the solution for the needs of our world as we hear your voice speaking to us. In Jesus' name, amen. So we've been talking about how even in the Old Testament, that they weren't just created to be people who followed rules to make a master happy, but even right from the beginning of creation, from Adam and Eve through Abraham and beyond, that God's plan was always to have a relationship with people, so that through that connection with God, that we would become a blessing to the world, not by following rules that we would take care of ourselves. So we see that as they got into the promised land last week with Joshua, that it was when they had that connection with God, when they had leaders who helped them to realize that they needed God, that things went well. And it was when the people who had firsthand experience of God died, and they started to try to find their own way to have things make sense, that things didn't work well. And we saw that cycle go up and down and up and down. A good ruler, they'd do well, they'd forget about God, they'd cry out another good ruler, and that cycle just kept on continuing. So we're at a place now where this is still during the period of the Judges. And it looks to me like we're at a place where they're at one of these bottom part of the cycles. Because what does it say? The word of the Lord was rare in those days, and visions were not common. For me, that is a sign that they're not having a good leader that's reminding them to listen to God. And so it's into that situation. Probably the reason why that they're not hearing God very well is their spiritual leaders are corrupt. Eli himself isn't so bad, but his sons are corrupt. They're not using their position to serve the people. They're taking advantage of it for their own situation. So into that situation where the leaders are not helping them connect with God, God chooses once again an unexpected person. Once again, the son of a barren woman. And it was because of that, his mother's prayers, Hannah, where Hannah says, "If you allow me to have a child, I will give him back to you, to serve you." So that's exactly what's happening. She has a child, and he's living with Eli there in the tabernacle. And it's in that situation that now we see God raising up someone who will listen to God and who will do what God is calling him to do. Because Eli was supposed to be doing things to reprimand his sons, but he didn't. He wasn't listening to what God wanted him to do. So now we have this one who's going to be trained to hear God's voice, named Samuel. And he is going to be one who becomes so well respected that says not one of his words would fall to the ground. That he has such a connection with God that whatever he says happens. And so that people realize there's a true prophet, and during his lifetime, he helps the people to depend upon God and to hear God's voice.
The next reading is from 1 Samuel as well. The sons of priest Eli will all be wicked, as will Samuel's own sons. The people no longer want to trust the priests to lead, so they ask for a king. Samuel will warn that they are making a mistake. But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them into the ears of the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice and set a king over them."
So just before this, there is a description now of Samuel's sons. Samuel has decided that he is getting old and he wants to raise up as judges his own sons. But are they any better than Eli's sons? No, they're just as corrupt. And I think that's what's getting the attention of the people, is we've trusted these religious leaders to help us to succeed at life. But Samuel's sons aren't trustworthy, so why don't we just go and try to make life work the way that all of our neighbors make life work? Let's have a king. And we really can't depend on God. We'll depend on a king to do everything for us. And it makes me think sometimes that whenever the church stops being who the church is called to be, when we stop being the ones who love and care for and serve our neighbors, where does society think they need to turn when we stop being the ones who love and care for each other? We need a government program to solve it for us, and that's pretty much what's happening. The religious people are not doing it, so we want a king. And if you read through this section, basically both the emotions of Samuel and of God are sadness. They're rejecting me, God says, thinking that a human king can do a better job of providing leadership than I can. So it's with that God says, go ahead. They're asking for a king. Why don't you go ahead and give them a king? So even though Samuel warns them that road can end up leading them to trouble, because when you strictly depend upon secular leadership, you end up forgetting who basically is the one that you need to trust, and that's God. But God says, give them a king, and God will end up providing a king for him. The first king will be Saul. And once again, even the thing that's going to be different now is it's not going to be like the judges where they're local leaders, but this is now going to be a king over the whole nation of Israel. And once again, the same situation is going to happen with the kings as happened with the judges. When there is a king who has a close relationship with God, then things will go well. And when there's a king who doesn't have a close relationship with God, or goes after idols, then they're going to be in trouble.
Also from Samuel 1, God will use missing donkeys to set up an appointment between Samuel and Saul. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed in Samuel, "Tomorrow, about this time, I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be ruler over my people, Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen the suffering of my people, because their outcry has come to me." When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, "Here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall rule over my people." Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him. He said, "The Lord has anointed you ruler over his people Israel. You shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you will save them from the hand of their enemies all around."
So God goes out and starts finding his king, and he sets up this divine appointment, and using something as interesting as lost donkeys that get Saul out on the road looking for the donkeys, and they get close to the place where Samuel is, and Saul and his friends say, who better to help us find the donkeys than the prophet Samuel? So And Samuel has already been told by God to be ready. This guy is going to come, and he's the one that I want to be the king. And once again, just as with the judges, people are crying out, they're suffering. And instead of a judge now, God is going to raise up a king to help to protect them, to defeat their enemies. And so he's the one that is chosen. He's successful. That the Spirit of God comes upon Saul, and he has this passion and this leadership, and the beginning of Saul's kingship is good.
Saul will choose to trust himself rather than God. Time for a new king. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul? I have rejected him from being king over Israel. Fill your horn with oil and set out. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons." Samuel said to Jesse, "Are all your sons here?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, but he is keeping the sheep." And Samuel said to Jesse, "Send him and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here." He sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. The Lord said, "Rise and anoint him, for this is the one." Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. The Spirit of God will be upon David, even as it leaves Saul. David will defeat Goliath and get Saul's attention. Saul will become jealous of David and then pursue him to kill him. When Saul dies, David will become king.
Like I said, Saul began well. He ended up drawing this diverse nation of tribes together and starting to defeat the enemies, the Philistines. But he's going to start to have, even though he starts well with his connection with God, it's going to start to fall apart. To the point that by the time he's done being king, he's going to be so disconnected from God that he's going to need to go to a medium, a witch, to even help him to have a spiritual experience. But what ends up happening is Saul's problems begin when he decides, in two different occasions, when God tells him how to do something, he decides to do it his own way. The first is after the enemy is defeated, he's supposed to do a certain set of things. He decides he has better plans, and Samuel warns him. Then later on, he's supposed to wait for a sacrifice at the appropriate time with Samuel, and he decides to rush and go ahead and do it himself. And once again, Samuel says, God can't use you. The kingdom's going to be taken away from you because you don't trust God, you're just trusting yourself. And from that point on, the Spirit starts to lift off of Saul. And it's going to take a while. It's not like just because Samuel says the kingdom's being taken away from you that the next day he stops being king. He's going to be king for a long time. But as he is king, God will plant the next king right there in the middle of what's going on in Saul's kingdom. He's going to raise up a shepherd boy named David. Once again, someone who wasn't even thought of as an option when a king was being chosen. Oh yeah, by the way, I forgot the son out in the field. He's the one that's going to be lifted up as king. But he's going to get the attention of the people by trusting God. That he's going to defeat the giant that nobody else is even willing to fight because he trusts God. He defeats Goliath and gets Saul's attention. Saul also has some emotional issues, especially as the Spirit's lifting off of him, that his emotional issues cause him to need music to help him calm down. And so David's musical skills will also be used as he becomes part of Saul's court. But David's gifts and talents are seen, and he ends up being sent out to lead some of the armies of Saul. And this is where the trouble comes in, because David is so successful that the women start singing songs. Saul, he's done pretty good, but David, he's really good. And so what do you think if you're the king and your general is being praised more than you are? You want to get rid of your general. So he's at the process of he gets to the place where he even throws a spear at David, trying to kill him. And David runs away. Saul will pursue him, try to kill him. David will have a couple of opportunities to kill Saul, but David knows it's not his place to decide who's king. So I'm not going to kill you, Saul. You're the one that God chose. Even though Saul would not hesitate to kill David. So it's only when Saul and his sons die in battle that David will now step up as king. And he starts out, after the first 7 years of his leadership, he's not king of the whole Israel. He's just king down in the south part of Judah, where his family was from. But later on, the whole nation says, He's the one that led us in all these victories, and the whole nation decides to call him as king.
Now we read from 2 Samuel. David will capture Jerusalem to make it the capital. David will be known as one who values God's presence and will arrange for the Ark of the Covenant to be brought to Jerusalem. It was told King David, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the Ark of God." So David went and brought up the Ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. David danced before the Lord with all his might. David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out at the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord, who chose me in place of your father and all his household to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord, that I have danced before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this."
Every time I hear that, it reminds me of a camp song that we used to do, is "I will be much more undignified than this." It's sort of a fun camp song. So back to the sermon. David's not perfect, and we're going to definitely see that next week as we see, this is called the rise of Israel. Next week we're going to look at the fall of Israel. We're going to discover where some problems are involved in David's leadership as well. But the thing that makes him more qualified for God to work with him and through him is that he has that heart for God, that relationship with God. And you see that even in his mistakes, the thing that he's most afraid of losing is not his reputation or his privilege. The thing he's most afraid of losing, as you read in Psalm 51, after the whole issue with Bathsheba and Uriah, is don't take your spirit from me, don't take your presence from me, because that's the most important thing in my life. And that's what's going to help him to be the king that God can use, is that he's someone who values God's presence. And because of that, he says, if we're going to have our new capital, Jerusalem, be a place where God will bless us, we need to focus on God's presence. So what is it that represented God's presence back in those days before the temple? It was the Ark of God, the Ark of the Covenant. So they ended up having this big ceremony to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. They sacrificed animals every 6 steps. Must have been quite a procession. And played the trumpets. And it was, as the ark came, David just delighted in God's presence. So he was so excited that he took off his outer clothes and started dancing like crazy. And what did his wife, Michal, think as she watched her husband come into town? You know what, David, that's not very kingly. You need to be sophisticated. You need to have people impressed with how sophisticated you are if you're going to be a good king. And David said, you know what qualifies me to be king is not how impressive I am before the people. What qualifies me to be king is that I enjoy God's presence. And when God's presence is there, I'm not going to, as a matter of fact, I'm going to even look crazier next time. Because that's the way that I am around God's presence. And that's what's going to qualify him to be the king that God can use.
The last reading is from 2 Samuel chapter 7. David will want to build a house for God, but God says he will build a house for David. It will be David's son who will build the house, the temple for God. His name will be Solomon. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me.
So we said that David knew that the thing that needed to be most important in his new capital was focusing on the presence of God. So as of this point, there was no temple yet. All there was the Ark of the Covenant. And so David says, if we're really going to focus on God's presence, we need to have that visible. So I want to build a temple. But what does God say to David? You've been a man of warfare and bloodshed, and I want the one who builds my temple to be a man of peace. And that's going to be his son Solomon. But David is so excited about the temple, he basically does everything except build the temple. He collects all the supplies, he makes all the plans, so Solomon just needs to step in and do it once he's raised up. But it's interesting because this week is the rise of Israel as our topic. It's amazing that we are only going to be 3 kings in, and the fall of Israel is already going to start next week. Because what's going to happen, even under Solomon, he's going to end up allowing idolatry to creep back into the land. And once again, God's going to say, I can't use this, to the point that even Solomon's own son, Rehoboam, is going to have most of the kingdom ripped away from him because he's trusting his own strength. I'm going to show him how tough I am, rather than trusting in the strength of God. So as we think about what God's saying to us as we read through this section of Samuel and the Kings, is we're not at a time anymore where it's just a few special people that God speaks to, so to save the rest of the people out of their problems. But what does it say in the New Testament? My sheep hear my voice. What does it say in Acts? All of them, men, women, young, old, slave, free. We're not going to be at a time when the word of the Lord is rare and visions are uncommon. We're going to be at a time where it's supposed to be normal. And that is where everybody hears God's voice. And as we understand that that's what we have to offer the world, is that we are the people who hear God's voice and value God's presence, so that we love our neighbor and we serve our neighbor. And not that we won't need government anymore, but the government maybe won't have to do everything when we actually remember who we are. When our neighbors start to see the best option I have for my problems is not to find a program, but the best option I have to solve my problems is to go hang out with those people that know Jesus. Amen.